Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. This week we got a new chapter of One Piece, obviously. It's actually kind of a controversial one. In fact, ever since chapter 1044, I have noticed that more and more people are getting more comfortable voicing their criticisms for this arc and the way this arc has gone, which makes sense because after 4 years, we're finally getting close to the arc ending. So we're going to be talking about all of that and just like the general sense of the fandom right now. And then also I'm going to talk about sort of a secret that I think this chapter kind of reveals, or at least alludes to being revealed, and I'll do that by the end. In other news, during the week, there was a promotional image, or promotional poster, I guess, that was released for Film Red. And the poster actually features Luffy in Gear 5, which means that it's very likely that Luffy will appear in Gear 5th in the movie. So, just another way of getting people to go watch the movie to see Gear 5th animated before the anime gets to the episode. And that bit of information also got me thinking about Sunny-kun, because not only is Sunny-kun the result of rampant capitalism, right, and wanting to merchandise this film more, but also Sunny-kun has to be the result of somebody using their devil fruit power on the ship, on the Sunny. So I'm wondering if maybe Luffy's awakening is the power that is used on the Sunny to create Sunny-kun. Because one of the features of Luffy's awakening is that it has a lot of cartoony attributes to it. And Sunny-kun looks like a Care Bear. So maybe Nika's power of imagination was the one that transforms the Sunny into this sort of cartoon, lovable, adorable version of itself. Or it could also be Uta's power as well, because Uta has like that magical, like singing voice. Maybe she has like a music power that transforms things. Alright, so this week the cover shows Reiju and Ichiji busting into action to save Yonji and Niji. And if you look at Reiju and Ichiji, they're wearing their raid suits. I'll say this again, I think it's pretty obvious that Oda wants us to think that they were the intruders, but they are not. In fact, this cover page to me confirms even further that they are not, because look at Ichiji's boots. Those shoes look nothing like the shoes that we saw in the intruders. So the possibility of the intruders being two completely different people from Reiju and Ichiji is still wide open. Alright, so we start off with Kaido falling, and in the sort of picture map that we get, we can clearly see that one of Kaido's horns is broken. And this is a detail that I know some of you guys caught last week. And so that kind of a detail, that kind of a gesture, coupled with the fact that we see Kaido being pushed out of his Zoan form, is a pretty strong indicator pointing towards Kaido actually being defeated. A similar thing happened with Doflamingo where, his glasses shattered, right? As a symbol for his defeat. Also, as far as I understand the Zoro kills Kaido theory, in order for that theory to work, Kaido has to be in his Zoan form. He has to be in dragon form, because the whole thing is that Zoro has to kill the dragon above the flower capital, just like Ryuma did. And right now, Kaido is out of his dragon form. So in order for that theory to work, Kaido would have to awaken and go back into his dragon form with a missing horn. And then Zoro would also have to find a way of being awake, or regaining consciousness. So I'm looking at the hole that Big Mom fell into, and it brings me to my first question, which is that how much of those tunnels, how much of those holes did Law and Luffy create? Did they create the whole thing? Or were those tunnels, were those craters already sort of there? Because if they opened up the whole thing, that's crazy. That's insane. It's not very clear. So that's confusing. We get a pretty nice, wholesome Avengers moment with Yamato catching Luffy to break his fall. And then we get the people in the capital celebrating with the lanterns. And I know that a pretty good argument that some people have brought up is that these people in the capital don't even know who saved them. And so I thought about that and I was like, well, does it really matter if the people know that Luffy saved them? I guess it kind of does if Oda wants the people of Wano to have Luffy's back, especially in the endgame, in the final war. But technically speaking, there are other ways of gaining people's support. Like for example, having the new leader of Wano, which is kind of how the chapter ends, having the new leader of Wano convince them that Luffy was the savior. So Oda could technically take that route, but there's a rule in writing that's called show don't tell, right? So if you're just telling them, then it's not as valuable as them witnessing or as them, being shown who Luffy is via his actions. We go on to another wholesome moment between Toko and Tengoyama Hitetsu, and Toko begins thinking about her adoptive father, Yasui. And the brief little flashback that we get is a pretty good reminder of how smileys don't work like normal devil fruits. Because when it comes to devil fruits, if you have two people that take a bite out of the same devil fruit, the first one to take the bite gets the power. They get the ability. But when it comes to smileys or artificial devil fruits that don't grant you a power, anybody can take a bite out of the same fruit and still suffer the consequences of the side effects, meaning that you won't be able to express any other emotion aside from laughter and joy forced joy and forced laughter. And this flashback kind of seems to amend or sort of change what was said in a Vivre card. Because in one of the Vivre cards, it kind of said that only Toko had eaten the smiley, and that Yasui had actually sort of adapted to that and sort of like started laughing voluntarily to not let Toko feel so alone, to make Toko feel comfortable. At least that's kind of what one of the Vivre cards was implying. So this chapter pretty much changes that, and it turns out that Yasui actually did consume a smiley. So yeah, this chapter pretty much confirms that Oda has the power to change / amend or expand on what's on the Vivre cards. And so it turns out that the only message that I care about on these lanterns is Toko's. Because here's a little girl that has actually accepted the loss of her father and just decides to cross out her wish and comes to terms with the fact that her dad died for a reason. He died for a bigger cause than her own desire to see him again, which I think it just fits perfectly. I think that's my favorite part of this chapter. I think it's an interesting choice that Oda decides to have Nekomamushi be the one to announce the fact that the two Yonko are down. If I had to guess, I think it's because in Zou, Nekomamushi is sort of like the Lord of the Night. He's in charge of overseeing what happens at night. And so it kind of makes poetic sense that he's the one to sort of introduce the dawn, that he's the one sort of announcing the dawn. Because as many of you have noted, it's not morning yet, right? The sun isn't up yet. But then also there's a brief reference to his feud with Inuarashi about how they started fighting. Ever since Odin's execution, they started fighting. They couldn't get along. And even though that feud was sort of resolved in Zou, it's still kind of like a reference to that, sort of an echo to that feud. And so we get a bunch of reaction shots, and even though I think it's an absolute crime that Oda did not show us Beppo go Sulang form during this raid, I do appreciate that small little panel of him hugging his sencho, his captain. Now, out of all the supernova here, Apu was always the one who never really believed that they could do anything against the Yonko. So he's the one proven wrong, he's the one who's sort of like in shock, can't believe it. So it makes sense that Oda decided to leave him awake or conscious by the end so that he could witness the defeat of the Yonko as well as the defeat of his own mentality. So there's a lot of people that need medical attention, 3 of which are Kinemon, Kiku, and Zoro. And so Zoro seeing the Grim Reaper is still a plot point that needs to be resolved and addressed here, as well as he also needs to go to Ryuma's grave before the end of the arc, or before the Straw Hats leave Wano. So yeah, that's something that he needs to do. And then for Usopp, I think the reason for why Izo entrusted him with Kiku and Kinemon is because Usopp is going to be rewarded by the end of the arc. I think Izo is going to give Usopp a weapon upgrade, because Izo's the one with the flintlocks, right? He has like the pistols and the guns and stuff. So I think that maybe Izo will reward Usopp with a brand new weapon, with an upgrade. Just like Nami received an upgrade to her weapon by the end of Zou. So maybe Usopp's new weapon will match Yasopp's, or will be similar to Yasopp's, so that he can get ready to meet his dad. Then again, Usopp is really creative, so maybe he'll adapt whatever Izo gives him to match his own style. And then also Wano is the birthplace of Sea Stone, so Usopp might get some Sea Stone ammo before he goes as well. After that, Momonosuke throws a curveball. He essentially tells Sunisha that he's not going to open up the borders just yet. Apparently, we haven't waited enough. We're going to have to wait another several years for this plot point to pay off. And that brings me to my next point, which is that some One Piece fans are upset about the arc's pacing. I think it was 2 weeks ago, I saw this comment on Reddit that beautifully summarized what the issue is. So this user was saying that Wano is an arc that feels both dragged out and rushed at the same time. How is this possible? Well, I'll tell you how it's possible. It's possible because the things that nobody cares about, or the things that very few people care about, such as Tama, such as the Scabbards, such as Momonosuke crying that he's not good enough, such as Orochi, such as the comedic relief gifters, members of Kaido's army, such as samurai reaction shots to anything. Those are the type of things that Oda decides to draw panels upon panels about.
Exclamation point, smiley face, like we give a
But when it comes to the things that people really care about, such as, in this case, Sunisha's secret history, right? Sunisha's goal, Sunisha's connection to Momonosuke, or the world building, which in this case would include actually opening up the borders of Wano, which was something that was sort of foreshadowed and promised ever since Zou, or spending more time with some of the supernova like Apu, Drake, and Hawkins, and fleshing them out more as characters, or getting a more fleshed out / substantial backstory for Kaido that explains his motivation and past relationships in greater detail. Those are the kind of things that we either skip, or we sort of skim through them, or we are told to wait. Now, we already kind of know why Momonosuke would want to keep the borders shut, at least for the time being. It's because, according to Oden, the reason the borders were shut in the first place was to protect Wano from a huge threat from the outside, which I'm guessing in this case would mean the world government. So the only way that Momonosuke will feel comfortable enough to open up the borders again is when the world government gets defeated. And so of course it's going to be up to Luffy to do that. He's going to be the one to take down the world government so that everybody can live happily ever after. But that's endgame stuff, right? So I'm guessing that we're going to have to wait until the end of the final war for Wano to open up its borders. And there's nothing inherently wrong with waiting. After all, patience is a virtue. It's just that because the waiting has been excessive, you do begin to question whether it's going to pay off or not, given what we've seen. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So, my favorite fight in this entire raid has been Robin versus Black Maria. I think the fight has themes that fit Robin's character perfectly. It suits the story. Like there's some creative usage of Robin's double fruit that we hadn't seen before, so it pays off. I really enjoyed making those videos covering that fight, and I really had fun making that chapter review. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that we hadn't gotten a Robin fight in so long. We were starving for some one-on-one Robin action. I really want to crunch some numbers here, and I really want to put this into perspective. So, Robin's last 1v1 fight took place in chapter 265 in Skypiea. So, you can see that right. Robin versus Yama, 265. Now, Demonio, which is the chapter where Robin beats Black Maria, that took place in chapter 1021. Okay, so it's 265 to 1021. So that would be 756 chapters between those events. Now, if you want to take those chapters and convert them into real life waiting time, if you want to get the real life waiting between those two events. So Yama versus Robin came out in 2003, and Robin versus Black Maria came out in 2021. That's 18 years between those chapters. Now, thankfully, this whole Kaido situation didn't really take 18 years to build up, right? Or to get to this point. It didn't take 18 years, thankfully. However, we can still ask the question, was the wait worth it? Was the waiting time for this excessive? Did we really have to wait as long as we did to see Luffy use a giant punch to send Kaido into a volcano? Probably not. I think there are things in this arc and in other arcs like Dressrosa and Fishman Island that could be edited down, that could have been edited better for it not to take as many chapters as it did to get to this point. Anyway, I want to move on to talk about something regarding the lore of Wano that I think this chapter sort of begins to reveal a little bit. Because as you get older, like you realize that I think a lot of the times it's up to us to find value in things. Because when it comes to life, I think it's pretty inaccurate to say that everything is good and everything is perfect. Because then there's no room for growth. There's no room for improvement. But I also think it's equally as inaccurate to say that something is complete trash and that everything is horrible. That's black and white thinking, and typically the things that we encounter in life have a bunch of gray in them. And so with that in mind, I want to talk about the part of the chapter that I think was valuable for me in terms of what it adds to the lore, what it could add to the lore. Because again, I do think that it's my responsibility to at least try and add more value. And so I learned something this week, which is that if you go back in time, it turns out that underneath Mount Fuji, or a long time ago, before Mount Fuji grew to its current height, there was actually another volcano right next to it. And the name of that mountain was Komitake. Now, why is this relevant to this chapter? Well, I want to go back to this map here. This is a map of Wano before Kaido moves Onigashima, before he makes the island float. And this is the map that we get in this chapter after Onigashima has been removed and taken to the mainland. So if you notice, the top of where Onigashima used to be. Yeah, so that looks very similar to the top of Mount Fuji, right? So Oda is depicting these two structures in the same way, which means to me that both of these are volcanoes, which means that Onigashima was on top of a volcano all this time. And so not only does this explain why Babanuki has a front row seat to the eruption, because Babanuki is in Udon, and Udon is kind of close to where Onigashima used to be. But it also explains why Marco was confused. I think it's Marco in the manga, but in the anime, Izo is the one who's like, so they call that place Onigashima now. So they didn't know that it was called that, and I think it's because before Kaido's arrival to Wano, there was just a volcano there. So Marco and Izo ended up leaving Wano at the exact same time, and then later, Kaido came in using his fire clouds, carrying this giant skull, and then placed it at the top of that volcano. This explanation would also fit given the fact that we know that Onigashima has snowy weather. Like there's like snow all over the place, right, along the island, just like the top of Mount Fuji is also covered in snow. So the top of both volcanoes would seem to have the same type of weather. In addition, the ending of this chapter could also serve to explain this image, which is an image of the Kozuki clan creating the Poneglyphs, because if you notice, in the background you see a volcano erupting, but then you see water as well in the foreground, in the front. So maybe this is the volcano that the Kozuki clan used to create the Poneglyphs all those years ago. And so maybe Onigashima's old name or former name has something to do with Mount Komitake, which again was a volcano that was there way before Mount Fuji. Now, I'm not really sure why Kaido being in the magma would be enough reason for him to actually die, given the fact that we literally saw him encase himself in a giant dragon that appeared to be made out of magma. But speaking of volcanic eruptions, we already know from Skypiea that once volcanoes erupt, they shoot out pyrobloin into the atmosphere, into the sky. And that substance is a crucial component in the creation of sky islands, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if a new sky island, gets born out of this eruption, and then Kaido gets shot up into the sky and ends up in a sky island. And that's maybe where he dies. So it would be kind of the opposite of his introduction, where the first time we saw Kaido, he was on top of a sky island and he jumped down, tried to die, but couldn't. And now he's being shot up onto a sky island and actually meets his end. I know it was Yonko Productions who made the comparison of Kaido falling into the magma and it being sort of like a reference or an echo to Odin dying by falling into the burning oil. So again, some poetry there as well, which I think is pretty fitting. There's a silhouette. There's a panel where we get two silhouettes together. One of them is obviously Kaido's silhouette, and then people are saying that the other silhouette next to him is Big Mom's silhouette, but I don't really see it. Like, I'm looking at the panel and it doesn't really look like Big Mom. I guess it's because, to me, Big Mom's silhouette would look something like this, and I don't really see the resemblance in this. I feel like it's just sort of Kaido being dragged along the stream of lava, just sort of kind of floating or just, moving. But I could be wrong, though. If I had to guess, I think Big Mom has already been rescued by her children via the secret passageway that we know exists underneath Wano as well. I think another interpretation could be that it's just showing Kaido's coat burning away. So in the first silhouette, Kaido still has his coat, but then in the second silhouette, the coat has fizzled out or sort of been dissolved by the lava. Now, if this is actually the end for Kaido, again, like I said before, I do think that this ends up hyping up Akainu's power. I think it's pretty obvious that Oda has made a deliberate choice to hype up Akainu via King's final attack, via Kaido's quote-unquote final attack, and via this volcanic eruption. Now, it's also important to be fair, and if this is really the end for Kaido, Luffy got back up, during this fight. He got back up 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. The first time, he ran out of his gear force, and Zoro had to save him. The second time, he got hit with the Ragnarok, got knocked out, and then he came back knowing how to use Advanced Conqueror's Haki. The third time, he got knocked out, and Kaido threw him off of Onigashima. So he fell into the water, and then he got back up there, riding on Momonosuke. So that's the third time. The fourth time is when the CP0 agent interferes with the fight, and Kaido beats him. And then he awakens. He awakens his mythical Zoan fruit. And then even after he awakens, I think at one point, he does something to his heart. Luffy kind of restarts his heart so that he can continue to fight. So Luffy has gotten back up during this fight about 4 to 5 times. And so you look at that, and I do ask myself, I think it's a very normal question, why couldn't at least half of those opportunities be offered to Kaido as well? Again, if this is in fact the end for Kaido, assuming this is the end for the strongest creature and the strongest pirate, Luffy got back up 4 to 5 times during this fight. If this is how things end for Kaido, then that means that Kaido didn't even get half of those opportunities. And there's actually 3 different announcements that Oda has in this chapter saying the same thing, which is that Kaido is done. So the first one is Nekomamushi announcing that they've beat 2 Yonko, 2 emperors. Another announcement is made via the text box near the end of the chapter. So that's been amended, because before, it was that Kaido had won, but now it's amended to Luffy being the winner of the fight as the eruption takes place. And then the third one is Momonosuke actually saying that the eruption, that's the signal for the end of Kaido, as he's towering over the people of the Flower Capital. And in that panel, you see Panda Man running away from Momonosuke in the lower right. Somebody on Reddit from Pirate Folk pointed out that if you look at Momonosuke's back, you see the scabbards riding him. And if the scabbards are there, it's pretty certain that Hiyori is also riding Momonosuke. So it means that maybe Hiyori and Momonosuke have already interacted, and we kind of skipped that part. So I'm guessing that we're going to get the brother and sister reunion after Momonosuke goes into his human form again, once we see what he looks like. The chapter ends with Denjiro declaring that they brought the new shogun of Wano with them. And I think it's very fitting that we do get to see the scabbards as shadows in the back, because that was part of Toki's prophecy, right? The shadows, even though I'm pretty sure that we're missing Kinemon Kiku and Ashura Doji. Now, the reason the scabbards look like shadows in that panel is because Momonosuke has gone poof, and he's sort of transforming back into his human form. So he's probably going to look like Odin, right? I'm expecting him to look a lot like Odin. And so I'm pretty sure that Denjiro means Momonosuke, because that's the person that is about to be revealed. Although he could technically also mean Hiyori, because Momonosuke isn't really confident, and I think he feels like he's not ready. Or is he ready? I don't know. But yeah, you can make that argument, like we don't know if Hiyori is going to be the shogun temporarily, and then eventually, sort of like a placeholder for Momonosuke, and then eventually Momonosuke will be the ruler. Like he'll take that spot once he feels he's ready. So I guess we'll get 2 fully definitive answers next week, which is that who's going to be the next shogun, Hiyori or Momonosuke, and whether or not Kaido's actually done for good. That's going to do it for me. Just like last chapter, I thought this was an average chapter of One Piece. By itself, if I just look at the chapter by itself, there's nothing too offensive in it. Like, without knowing what happens next, there's nothing too offensive in this chapter. So I just thought it was an average chapter of One Piece. However, I do understand why it would get people to question whether this is actually going to pay off or not, whether the wait is actually going to pay off or not. I totally get that. But at the same time, I do think that there's some value in every chapter, really. And it's my responsibility to sort of bring focus to that as well. I'm also nowhere near giving up hope. I have that hope that it's going to pay off, and that Oda will do his thing like he always does, and it'll be great. But it's just, you do kind of question. It's just normal questions that you ask yourself. I'm holding on to that hope. Average chapter of One Piece. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of your support. Take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.